What happens when a 34-year-old African military leader publicly challenges a former U.S. president? Today, we expose the explosive confrontation that's reshaping global politics. In April 2025, Barack Obama made an unprecedented move by sending a private letter to Captain Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso's military leader who seized power in 2022. The letter urged Traoré to reconsider his pivot toward Russia and away from Western allies. What Obama never expected was that his confidential diplomatic outreach would be thrust into the global spotlight. Within days, Traoré not only published Obama's 3-page letter for the world to see, but responded with a blistering 7-page rebuttal that systematically dismantled decades of Western policy in Africa. The young leader accused the former president of hypocrisy, resource exploitation, and security failures that cost Burkinabe lives. Your concern for our democratic institutions rings hollow, Traoré wrote in the most quoted passage, exposing what many Africans have long suspected about Western intentions on the continent. Have you ever wondered what really happened behind closed diplomatic doors when billions in resources are at stake? This confrontation pulls back the curtain on conversations typically hidden from public view. If you're fascinated by the hidden mechanics of global power, hit subscribe and the notification bell right now to join our magnificent story community, uncovering what mainstream media won't tell you about the real power struggles reshaping our world. In September 2022, Captain Ibrahim Traoré stormed onto the global stage at just 34 years old, becoming Africa's youngest leader when he seized power in Burkina Faso's second coup that year. A former artillery officer with combat experience against jihadist insurgents, Traoré's rise wasn't merely ambitious. It was born from desperation. By the time he took control, Burkina Faso was facing catastrophic security collapse. Nearly 40% of the country had fallen under jihadist control. Over 2 million citizens had been internally displaced. Attacks on villages happened almost daily, with government forces unable to protect civilian populations. The previous leadership failed to address our security crisis. Traoré declared in his first address, "We cannot continue with partners who have proven ineffective." What shocked Western capitals wasn't just Traoré's seizure of power, but his immediate diplomatic realignment. Within months, he demanded the complete withdrawal of French military forces that had been stationed in Burkina Faso for nearly a decade, expelled the French ambassador, ending a colonial relationship dating back to 1919, signed military cooperation agreements with Russia, welcoming advisors and equipment, formed the alliance of Sahel states with Mali and Niger, creating a bloc of nations all turning away from Western influence. While Western media labeled him a dictator, millions of Burkinabe citizens saw him as something else entirely, a liberator. Public support for Traoré remains remarkably high, with massive pro-government rallies in the capital Ouagadougou featuring Russian flags alongside Burkinabe ones. To understand why it requires looking beyond political ideology to the fundamental question, after decades of Western security partnerships, why had terrorism only expanded? In April 2025, diplomatic circles worldwide were stunned when a private letter from Barack Obama to Captain Ibrahim Traoré leaked to the public. Former presidents rarely engaged directly with foreign leaders, particularly those who came to power through unconstitutional means. Even more unusual, the current U.S. administration had maintained official distance from Traoré's government. The 3-page letter, written on Obama's personal stationery, expressed deep concern about Burkina Faso's geopolitical pivot. According to sources who viewed the original document, Obama reminded Traoré of the long-standing friendship between the U.S. and Burkina Faso, detailed $1.2 billion in development aid provided during his presidency, warned about malign Russian influence in Africa, suggested Burkina Faso would face increasing isolation by continuing its current path, offered to facilitate renewed dialogue with Western partners. This communication violates fundamental diplomatic protocols, notes Ambassador Roland Dubois, former EU envoy to West Africa. Typically, former leaders coordinate such outreach with current administrations to ensure consistency in foreign policy messaging. The State Department's carefully worded response, stating that Obama was acting in his personal capacity, raised further questions about coordination behind the scenes. Dr. Gloria Washington, Director of African Studies at Georgetown University, observes, this letter suggests panic among Western policy circles about losing influence in resource-rich regions of Africa. The decision to deploy Obama, who retained significant goodwill on the continent, was clearly strategic. What would drive a former president to bypass normal channels and directly contact a military leader the U.S. doesn't officially recognize? The answer likely lies in what Burkina Faso possesses beneath its soil and the growing competition to control it. Beneath Burkina Faso's dusty Sahelian soil lies the true context of this diplomatic confrontation. Extraordinary mineral wealth that transforms this landlocked nation from a poverty-stricken country into a geopolitical prize. Burkina Faso ranks as Africa's fifth largest gold producer, extracting 52 tons annually worth approximately $3.1 billion. Beyond gold, the country possesses significant deposits of zinc, silver, limestone, copper, manganese, and most critically, uranium, essential for nuclear energy and weapons. Western interest in Burkina Faso has never been primarily about democracy or terrorism, explains resource economist Dr. Victor Okonkwo. Control of these strategic minerals drives policy decisions that are rarely discussed publicly. In his response to Obama, Traoré focused heavily on mining contracts signed between 2009 to 2017, directly during Obama's presidency. The most controversial was the 2012 agreement with Northbridge Resources, a multinational consortium with significant American investment and board members with direct ties to Washington. According to documents Traoré published alongside his response, the Northbridge deal included a 30-year tax holiday, eliminating nearly all revenue for the Burkinabe government, exclusive rights to 18,000 square kilometers of mineral-rich territory, permission to use private security forces in their area of operations, no requirements for local employment or technology transfer, exemption from environmental impact assessments. When you express concern about our new partnerships, Traoré wrote to Obama, were you worried about our democracy or about these contracts we're now reviewing? The resource wars happening in Africa impact global prices and security. Like this video, so YouTube recommends it to others who need to understand what's really happening behind diplomatic language and media narratives. Perhaps the most damaging section of Traoré's response focused on security, the very issue that propelled him to power. The letter meticulously documented the paradox at the heart of U.S.-Burkina Faso relations during the Obama administration. Between 2009 and 2017, Burkina Faso received approximately $550 million in American security assistance. The funding provided military training, equipment, intelligence sharing, and counterterrorism resources. The stated goal: build Burkina Faso capacity to counter growing threat from armed extremist groups spilling over from Mali and Niger. The results tell a different story. During the exact period of this massive American investment, Traoré wrote, terrorist attacks in our country increased by 650%. Villages that had known peace for centuries began experiencing weekly massacres. Official data confirms Traoré's claims. In 2009, Burkina Faso recorded just 7 terrorist attacks. By 2017, that number had risen to over 150 incidents. By the time Traoré took power in 2022, attacks numbered in the hundreds annually, with thousands of civilian casualties. Most pointed was Traoré's challenge regarding intelligence capabilities. Your satellites can identify a license plate from space. Your agencies monitor global communications. Yet somehow, thousands of weapons and fighters crossed our borders undetected for years. This raises uncomfortable questions about whether security failure was a matter of capacity or priority. How does terrorism expand by 650% in the same region, receiving $500 million in security assistance? Traoré's letter demanded an answer. The question undermines the entire foundation of Western security partnerships in Africa, suggesting either staggering incompetence or more troubling possibilities. What transformed this exchange from private diplomacy to global controversy was Traoré's unprecedented decision to publish both Obama's original letter and his own 7-page response. On May 3, 2025, the complete correspondence appeared simultaneously on Burkina Faso's government websites and Traoré's personal social media accounts, instantly reaching millions worldwide. Transparency is necessary when dealing with nations that have historically operated through hidden agendas. Traoré explained in a brief video introduction. Let the world judge the substance of this exchange. The response methodically dismantled Western narratives about Burkina Faso, presenting documented evidence alongside pointed accusations. On democracy, your concern for our democratic institutions rings hollow when we recall that your administration remained silent during the 2014 uprising against President Compaore, who had maintained power for 27 years with Western support. Was democracy only valuable when it served particular economic interests? On resource exploitation, Western corporations extracted $7.4 billion in gold during your presidency, while our hospitals lacked basic medicine. The prosperity you promised never reached our villages. On military cooperation, the weapons your government provided were consistently insufficient, arriving months late, with maintenance packages that expired before implementation. Meanwhile, Russian equipment arrives within weeks of requests. Most damaging was Traoré's revelation of declassified French diplomatic cables, suggesting American awareness of plans to maintain neocolonial control in West Africa. These documents prove coordination between Western powers to ensure resource access regardless of local governance or civilian protection. When powerful nations claim to support democracy while propping up 27-year dictatorships, who really benefits? The letter concluded with a firm rejection of returning to previous arrangements. Burkina Faso will now chart its own path with partners who respect our sovereignty. The era of dictated friendship has ended. The publication of the Obama-Traoré exchange sent diplomatic shockwaves worldwide, triggering responses that highlighted deepening global divisions. The U.S. State Department issued an unusually brief statement within hours. We regret the public disclosure of private diplomatic communications. Former President Obama's letter represents his personal views, not current U.S. policy. Nevertheless, we remain concerned about growing Russian influence in West Africa. While Western governments expressed dismay at the breach of diplomatic norms, African leaders rallied behind Traoré's right, transparency. President Mahamat Kambala of Chad declared, "The era when African nations required Western approval for their diplomatic relationships has ended." Ghana's Foreign Minister Kwame Ajicam stated, Captain Traoré's response articulates frustrations many African nations have felt but hesitated to express publicly. Most significant was the social media explosion across Africa. Within 48 hours, #African Sovereignty, #NewAfrica, and #TraorSpeakTruth became the top trending hashtags across multiple countries. Video clips of ordinary Africans reading portions of Traoré's letter generated millions of views. This represents a fundamental power shift, explains geopolitical analyst Dr. Fatima Mensah. Young, digitally connected Africans are rejecting the notion that Western approval is necessary for legitimate governance. The enthusiasm for Traoré's message transcends Burkina Faso's borders, resonating across a continent increasingly skeptical of Western motivations. The letter has even influenced domestic politics in neighboring countries, with opposition leaders citing Traoré's arguments to question their own government's relationships with former colonial powers. The mainstream media won't show you how this letter is changing global alliances. Comment below with your thoughts on whether Traoré was justified in exposing this correspondence. Was it a necessary step toward transparency or a diplomatic misstep? While Western governments expressed dismay at the breach of diplomatic norms, African leaders rallied behind Traoré's right to transparency. President Mahamat Kambala of Chad declared, "The era when African nations required Western approval for their diplomatic relationships has ended." Ghana's Foreign Minister Kwame Ajicam stated, Captain Traoré's response articulates frustrations many African nations have felt but hesitated to express publicly. Most significant was the social media explosion across Africa. Within 48 hours, hashtag African Sovereignty, hashtag New Africa, and hashtag Traoré Speaks Truth became the top trending hashtags across multiple countries. Video clips of ordinary Africans reading portions of Traoré's letter generated millions of views. This represents a fundamental power shift, explained geopolitical analyst Dr. Fatima Mensah. Young, digitally connected Africans are rejecting the notion that Western approval is necessary for legitimate governance. The enthusiasm for Traoré's message transcends Burkina Faso's borders, resonating across a continent increasingly skeptical of Western motivations. The letter has even influenced domestic politics in neighboring countries, with opposition leaders citing Traoré's arguments to question their own government's relationships with former colonial powers. The mainstream media won't show you how this letter is changing global alliances. Comment below with your thoughts on whether Traoré was justified in exposing this correspondence. Was it a necessary step toward transparency or a diplomatic misstep? What makes the Russian approach appealing to leaders like Traoré? 3 key differences. First, immediacy. While Western military aid often involves years of bureaucratic processes, Russian equipment and personnel typically arrive within weeks of agreements. Second, pragmatism. Russian security assistance focuses on immediate combat effectiveness rather than institutional reform, addressing the urgent need to counter insurgent threats. Third, sovereignty. Russia imposes no governance conditions, political reforms, or human rights requirements in exchange for partnership. The Wagner Group, Russia's military contractor organization, has played a central role in this strategy. In Mali, Wagner forces participated directly in counterterrorism operations within months of arrival, producing tactical victories that boosted the government's standing. Western partners lectured us about governance while villages burned, a Burkinabe defense official told reporters. The Russians simply asked what weapons we needed to stop the massacres. While the West demanded democracy before security, Russia offered security without political conditions. For nations facing terrorist threats, which approach would you choose? This explosive exchange between Traoré and Obama signals a profound shift in global dynamics, extending far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. As resource-rich African nations increasingly assert sovereignty over their natural wealth, the century-old Western influence model faces unprecedented challenges. Several West African nations are now watching Burkina Faso's experience with Russia to determine their own future alignments. Uganda, Tanzania, and Zambia have already begun renegotiating extractive industry contracts with Western companies. The emerging generation of younger African leaders, many born after colonialism officially ended, appears less willing to accept economic arrangements established during the Cold War era. Are we witnessing the beginning of a new world order where former colonies no longer accept direction from their former masters? The exchange between Ibrahim Traoré and Barack Obama represents more than just diplomatic drama. It exposes fundamental tensions reshaping global politics. A young military leader governing a resource-rich nation publicly challenged decades of Western policy while choosing new allies who offer different terms of engagement. Key revelations from this confrontation include questionable mining contracts, failed security partnerships despite massive funding, and growing African resistance to Western influence models established during the colonial era. Critical questions remain unanswered. Was Obama acting alone or as an unofficial envoy? Will Burkina Faso's partnership with Russia deliver better outcomes than previous Western arrangements? How will other African nations respond to this public challenge of Western authority? The diplomatic lesson is clear. In today's connected world, nations can no longer rely on private channels to manage controversial policies. The public now demands transparency about decisions affecting national resources and security. This explosive exchange reveals how global power is shifting before our eyes. If you know someone who needs to understand what's really happening in Africa, share this video now. And subscribe to Magnificent Story for more hidden truths the mainstream media won't tell you about the real forces reshaping our world.